So we put together a series of talks, some of the senior teachers that are in this rotation on Tuesday night for our open houses. And I decided to start with this talk because it seems like dead of winter in New York City is a good time to talk about the lonely places or the dark places or the sad places in our experience. I don't want to be overly dramatic, and I don't want to be without joy. In fact, I can't think of anything funnier than depression, really, if you look at it in a way. And I think we can have a lot of fun with this. I think the problem with depression is it gets a bad rap. And we get embarrassed about it. How many people secretly love it, though? Sorry, I'm depressed. Madmen. I've just got to watch TV. It's okay. To some extent, too, depression seems like a perfectly reasonable response to the world we live in. If your heart is open and your mind is open, your eyes are open, it's hard not to get discouraged sometimes, I think, by a world that seems to be caught up very much in its own preoccupations. God knows what it is we're churning toward. I don't really understand it. I don't know what's happening exactly. Big pharmaceutical companies, people working on this and that, governments jockeying for position, bosses that don't understand us, the MTA. Just life itself. And all of it is difficult. I say this a lot, so if you've heard it before, I apologize, but it's a nice analogy. It's very personal. I live in Union Square, and so I take the 456 frequently at rush hour. And no human being should ever do that. The human body just isn't made for that. The mind isn't made for that. And our brain is sort of a composite, if you will, a conglomerate, an amalgam of different emotions and feelings, but also actually completely different functions, as you know. Many of those functions were created at different times and actually existent back from beginningless time, or the beginning of our race. They say there are still parts of the mind that are reptilian, right? Or animal-like. There are parts of the mind that really only know yes, no. Those minds got to be freaked out at rush hour on the 6th train. They just have to be. There have to be like a little crocodile in the back of our brain that just wants to snap people. And to some extent, if we don't understand how to navigate those stressors in our life, those stressors begin to build up inside us. They lodge in our body, and they actually harbor inside our tension. They create tension, and then they're harbored by the tension. Little pockets of insurgency, if you will, waiting to explode and erupt at the worst possible time. Sometimes, if we don't catch things in time, real debilitating illness comes out of the stress and tension and toxins of our life, you know. So interestingly enough, the way to counter that, well, there's a couple of methods. One is you could just remain oblivious to it, perhaps drink through it, blame other people, and then just get really sick at the end and let the pharmaceutical companies ease you out of your life. Another way is to kind of wake up right now and begin to become aware of what's uncomfortable. Isn't that odd? I wonder how many people thought they'd come here tonight and hear about how to become more uncomfortable. I think a lot of people go to meditation for some blissed out experience or the hope of something that will pull them away from the stress and turmoil of life. I'm going to recommend tonight that you go into it more deeply, more fully, and in fact less guarded. That you openly embrace the dark corners in your world, or at least give it a try. Because the stress and tension that we create to try to protect ourselves from things we cannot protect ourselves from is actually hurting worse than the things themselves, often. Does that make sense? What's the worst that can happen? Somebody actually throws a punch at your stomach. Well, it could get worse than that, but let's just keep it PG. But, you know, somebody actually levels a punch at you. somebody's screaming about God knows what, and they just sort of level a punch at you, what would you do? You would immediately tense up when you saw it coming. That does not help, even in that case. If you were to take martial arts lessons, how many people have done that? You're really not trained, are you, to become angry and tense? At what point are you trained to just get angry and become a ball of tension as a way to protect yourself? But yet we do that over and over again. I'm using extreme examples. Probably you won't get punched on the 6 train. But what happens is we punch ourselves over and over again in our day. Every time that boss comes by the cubicle, you know? Every time we're on the phone with our mother. Whatever it is, the things that make us slump, the things that kick us, the things that prod us. Somebody once told me, I worked with a healer, and she said, you've got like a cattle prod. Whenever you're mad at yourself, you sort of go into this spasm of, why do we do that? Are we trying to parent ourselves? We're trying to beat ourselves into submission? We're trying to gird our loins, perhaps? What eventually happens is we create a body of tension. We create a world where we're separated from the things we perceive are painful to us or will hurt us, but actually make us more vulnerable. Psychologically, we actually begin to harbor a lot of these stressors into our mind, and that create sort of bigger and bigger issues for ourselves. On the cognitive realm, we actually start to think that we can think through things by not paying attention to them. We get stressed out, and we start going off into a fantasy world, or a world of blame. Any kind of mental conditioning that we think is going to make the situation better. In fact, it does not ever make it better to ignore the situation.